Hey kids, today's show is brought to you by the letter 4 and the number potato! I'm a stupid private.
Hey, that sure was an exciting couple of weeks. It was,
Something?
Yes! Something! I love something! Something is my favorite!
Yeah, well, time for another episode and comic review. This week, it's Games Ponies Play and issue number 3 of the Friendship is Magic comic. Again, because the comics tell a continuous story, a quick recap. Queen Chrysalis has staged an invasion of Ponyville. After the main six defeat the changelings in town, they realize that the Cutie Mark Crusaders have been filly-napped. So our heroes have to fight their way through the mines of Moria and into the forest primeval. But not before the changelings use their shape-shifting powers to drive a wedge between the main six. Issue 3 starts with the ponies having been split into 3 groups, Twilight and Fluttershy, Applejack and Rarity, and Rainbow Dash and Pinkie Pie. Without trying to put too fine a point on it, this is basically the MLP equivalent of the Warriors.
Warriors, come out to play.
As in, it's fundamentally a story about running away. Each pair is the subject of a chase scene featuring some fearsome forest dwellers.
They're not exactly the baseball furies, but whatever.
But as you might expect, our little heroines escape and end up right at the gates of Mordor. I mean the Changeling Kingdom. Now it's time to break down the good and the bad in issue 3, starting with the covers. The MLP comics so far have had pretty cool covers, but 3 has to be my favorite. It features Queen Chrysalis and a group of 5 changelings, each one rocking one of the hairstyles of the main 6, minus Twilight. And they are menacing. The cover really shows off the cool design that they gave the changelings. Which is fitting, because this issue is basically all about the bad guys. The chase sequences featuring the main 6 are bookended with lots of scenes of Queen Chrysalis and her minions spying on the heroes and mocking them relentlessly, like this is Mystery Science Theater 3000 for them, while they hang out at her big castle. I was kind of expecting something a little more Hive-like. Well anyway, this issue is both funny and action-packed. If you know your pop culture references, you'll find gems from both Mr. Spock and Dr. Jones. This issue also has a pretty good example of why I like Rainbow Dash. Dash could easily have been an incredibly obnoxious character, like Scrappy-Doo. But let's compare the two for a second.
Science!
When Scrappy-Doo runs into a monster, what does he do? He charges the thing head-on, like an idiot. But when Dash is faced with a fight she pretty much can't win, she'll book it in the other direction, like a sensible person. Now on the flip side, middle child syndrome rears its ugly head once again. The trip through the forest is entertaining, but not much is accomplished other than getting the party one step closer to their ultimate goal and reversing the events of issue number 2 to a certain extent. But it's still an absolutely fantastic read. I highly recommend it. 4 out of 5. Now moving from the 4-color page to the small screen, let's talk about Games Ponies Play. Now if you'll remember back to Just for Sidekicks, the main 6 are headed to the Crystal Empire to welcome the Inspector from the Equestria Games. So, what's the central problem of the story, you may ask? Well, now it's time for America's favorite game, Wheel of Clichés. And the winner is Mistaken Identity. That's right, the plot point that can be undone by a single follow-up question. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Rainbow Dash is basically the driving force behind this episode. Apparently, as a young filly, Cloudsdale, her hometown, was in the running for the Equestria Games, but didn't win. Very sad. So when the Crystal Empire gets the same opportunity, Dash and the rest of the main 6 are hell-bent on winning the games.
Living vicariously through the accomplishments of others is so very healthy.
But in a wacky coincidence, the main 6 end up sucking up to some random tourist, while the real inspector gets left at the train station. But like it always does in these situations, the truth comes out. And in a less schmaltzy universe, this would have cost the Crystal Empire any chance of ever hosting anything larger than a dog show. But the heartfelt display wins over the real inspector, and all is right with the world.
Either that or Shine and Armor made a large donation to the Equestria Games subcommittee, if you know what I mean. I'm talking about bribery.
Now let's examine the good, the bad, and the ugly in this episode. As I said before, this episode in particular, and the show in general, relies on some pretty massive cliches. But that's excusable in true Fraserian fashion, because the strong characters make these somewhat hackneyed situations really work. Games Ponies Play is definitely a good comedy episode with lots of fun character interplay and a decent recurring gag involving Cadence's hair. And appearing in flashback with maybe 15 seconds of screen time and no dialogue is Rainbow Dash's dad. How about that? They also found a place for my favorite sound effect.
Cinnamon bun?
Yes. Now then, my main problem with this episode really is the fact that the entire situation could have been resolved with one follow-up question. Hell, not even that. An introduction would probably have fixed this. The episode also runs parallel to Just for Sidekicks, and I feel like that never really pays off at any point. The two are only really connected right at the beginning and right at the end. And I'm not saying that every episode needs to be this big climactic showdown between the forces of good and evil, but this one doesn't have much of any action in it. And finally, for an episode featuring the main six, AJ and Fluttershy basically have nothing to do. Kind of a lackluster episode, all things considered. My final score, 3 out of 5.
That's all, folks.